Hey, this is Deborah Goodrich Royce. I am here with Zak and Dustin on $2 late fee in Palm Beach with my snoring dog. You see her there? That's Georgina.
Look at you. You're like, oh my gosh, it looks like a presidential suite in behind you. It's
In Florida.
It does.
See, it's the wicker. You can see the kind of tropical stuff.
The Florida lighting, now that I know you're in Florida. How'd you fare in hurricane season?
So weirdly, we're on the other side of the peninsula from Fort Myers, which got so devastated by Ian. We lost a tree with Ian. There must have been like a little micro wind tunnel that came across. I always found LA a little scarier. The earthquake is very alarming to me because you do not get any warning. Well, look at Turkey and Syria now.
Yeah.
That is a little freaky.
Were you in the 94? I believe it was the 94 Northridge earthquake. Were you in that earthquake?
Not physically. My house was in it. I had moved back to New York and I had very, very bad, epically bad tenants in my house. So bad they were running a brothel in my house.
Whoa.
There's a mini documentary.
Over in Atwater Village. And because of that earthquake, it belabored the effort to get them out of the house because the police were extremely busy at that time. We can talk about that. It was the craziest story.
Did you find out about the brothel because of the earthquake? Was that what led you to learn?
So how that all happened, we were moving to New York. My first husband worked for Julia Roberts. She had a deal at Disney with Joe Roth. She wanted to live in New York. So he first was on the Disney lot, but she wanted the company in New York. So he flew to New York, found a place. We got these tenants. And so this girl showed up and she was this pretty blonde from Connecticut holding a baby, really like a prop baby. It was a real baby.
Oh my God.
It was a real baby.
So we lived in Atwater Village with a dear friend who lived in Silver Lake, who was our agent, our real estate agent. So this girl, her name was Sarah. I won't say her last name. She came to the door one day and maybe this was part of the setup. We were just about to sign a lease with another guy who was kind of aggressive and a little combative. Enter Sarah. And she was very sweet, but things were off from the get-go. I was chatting with her and I said, well, let me show you around the property. I'll take you out the back. She said, oh, I've already seen it. I've walked around your backyard. That's odd.
That's
odd.
Yeah.
But did I pay attention to that? No, I ignored that. So
Okay.
I said, And then when it came time to get the money, we had to go to the bank and she had this weird boyfriend. And she was very subdued around the boyfriend. It was just a completely different energy. And then I called the phone company and I say, this girl, Dana so-and-so, is going to be moving into the house. And they said, oh, we've heard from a Stacy so-and-so. So I called Dana and I said, it's a little funny. The phone company thinks your name is Stacy. She said, well, I used my sister's name. I owe them money. So we get to New York and the boyfriend is asking us this weird series of questions. We had, it's a tiny, 1,000 square foot house. Could we add a second sink to the bathroom?
Okay.
Well, that's an odd thing. And how easy is it to get back to the jacuzzi? It was one of those typical LA properties that had outbuildings, like a little guest house, a little office. Sure. I talked to my friend, the real estate agent. He said, Deborah, I need to talk to you about something about the house, about your tenant, but I can't speak to you for 1 week. I said, Paul, really? You can't? He said, no, I can't. So I speed dial him a week later and I said, ha ha ha, let me tell you what I thought. That boyfriend of that girl is a drug dealer and government's going to, stage a sting. He said, well, it's not drugs.
Oh, man.
So at the
Well, you're
same
not
time,
half wrong.
I hear from a neighbor who said there are all these cute little girls in mini skirts who are out walking this baby, this prop baby.
This prop baby.
They're babysitters.
Oh my
And
gosh.
the neighbor said they had, we had house numbers on the house and they put lights around it, but they moved in December and she thought it was Christmas. And she said, there are guys who arrive at your house all day long and Jaguars and BMWs. And yeah, they were running a brothel. And it's so hard to get people out of your house. And that earthquake came along. And then one of the neighbors said, why don't you just get a security guard? And I thought, I don't really know too much about this, but I'm going to bet if I'm paying some security guy a few $100s a day to sit in a brothel with a bunch of very pretty girls, he's going to take my money for the next 10 years. And
Oh my God.
nothing going on here, lady.
Yeah. Oh, everything's fine.
So finally, it took about 6 months.
Wow.
That's incredible. So, so you did not hire a security guard?
No, we had this very busybody older neighbor. I can't even think of his name.
Ralph Furley?
Kind of. And he did all this research and he would go sit there, and the boyfriend had some court dates for kind of mischief he'd gotten into. They had a track record of
Sure.
behaving badly. And
Of course.
so this neighbor would go sit at the court dates. And then Dana called me one day. She said, and we never mentioned anything. It was like high wasp decorum. She was from Connecticut. I'm from Connecticut. Nobody's saying a word. Everybody knows what's going on. And we're all behaving really well and discussing things like sinks and jacuzzis. And Dana called me one day and she said, you are harassing me. I am pregnant and I might lose this baby. I said, Dana, I don't even know what to say to you. I just really don't even know what to say to you.
Wow.
Yeah. So that was my Northridge earthquake.
Oh my gosh. Well, I mean, are you gonna, you need to turn that into a book. I mean, you've got 3 books out now. That's
an interesting idea.
I've got one of them right here, by the way. I've got Reef Road in my hand.
Yeah. I have the other 2. I have books here.
Good. Yay.
See them?
Woo.
Woo.
Woohoo. We'll have to
use
that for a screenshot later.
Yeah, I do turn things into books. I have not turned that into a book. It would be a good one, because what was fascinating about her was, as I said, this kind of, we're not going to say what's going on here personality she had. And some years later, she called my friend Paul, the real estate agent, for a recommendation.
Oh
and
my
said,
gosh.
Dana, you were probably the single worst tenant I've ever met in my life. And then I never lived in that house again. I had 2 little girls and I thought,
no.
Yeah, especially if you don't take a black light to it, and who knows what sort of,
Set it on
this is
fire.
Not Boogie Nights. This is not, oh my gosh. Well,
you never know who's going to show up in the middle of the night.
Right. That's true. Looking for Dana or Stacy or whoever, whatever
Zool
name
or whatever.
Yeah, really.
So you and I met about a month ago. It was such a phenomenal experience to hear you talk about a brief moment of your history in Los Angeles and then how you got on the path to becoming a writer. It's a really fascinating story. I mean, you could easily write your own biography and that would be a big hit seller.
Well, thank you. I mean, I think if you live a while, and I've lived a while, life is interesting and it has lots of stories. Like, people ask me sometimes, do you ever get writer's block? And my answer is, well, if you consider the first 50 years of my life, maybe I had writer's block, but it's been kind of a good run of ideas. And what's interesting at this juncture, having had some success as a young actress, and that was lovely, but I think at that moment, perhaps I didn't pay close enough attention to everything that was going on. And perhaps I thought it might always be that way or grow and build from there. And then life took some turns. And now it's a completely different experience in the ability to enjoy. Like I'm on this crazy book tour with 81 cities, and people say, oh, how can you do that? That's horrible. But it isn't. I'm just trying to enjoy it. Although I'm home in Palm Beach today because Madison, Wisconsin became virtual because of a snowstorm. So this is kind of relaxing. But I think the difference you get as you get older is this, you just don't take as much for granted, and you realize I probably should enjoy this now because it might not last.
That's a great attitude.
Whereas you're saying when you started acting initially, you were kind of perceiving it as sort of a linear thing of like, this is my career and I'm now advancing and I will be running Hollywood in a few years.
In about 3 minutes.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. For me, one of the biggest, to use the COVID word, pivots was getting pregnant with my first daughter. I had just screen tested for About last night, and that was a very small group of actresses at the final screen test. And when I got pregnant, I thought I would just bounce back to work. I didn't realize, one, that I would change, and two, that on the heels of my pregnancy, there was a writer's strike. So it expanded the length of time away. And when I came back, I guess my priorities were different. My allotment of time was different.
Sure.
And I found myself, going to great lengths to try to get a project that I probably wouldn't pay money to go see. And it just became a question of perspective.
I mean, that makes a lot of sense. And at that point, it probably did you find your relationship to things like where it was like, even the simple idea of just going to an audition would suddenly become like, ugh.
Yeah, it's cumbersome. And of course, this was the olden days. And this was before all the technology we have now. So I was living in Atwater Village, and I would get a call at 6 o'clock in the evening to pick up a script in Culver City. And I had a 1-year-old and a 4-year-old, and 6 in the evening is like the witching hour. You've got to get
Horrible.
fed and in bed, and the idea of driving, the bloom was off the rose. Maybe I think it's different if your career is in a different position. I felt like my career took a step back in the time I took off, and it wasn't ever in the place where I was just being offered roles. That might be a whole different game.
Sure. You're not getting the scripts messengered to your home, clearly.
That's right. Hand delivered. Here you go, man.
Yes.
Well, do you look back on your career as an actor fondly, though? I
do. I really do. I think it was such a wonderful thing to do in my 20s and early 30s. I'm glad I went to college. I'm glad I was able to do something else. I don't wish I were doing it now, but I loved the people and the projects and the travel and the change, because everything is, you're always looking for a new job, which is of course dismaying when you first start out as an actor, because in most other walks of life, you gear yourself up to get a job, and then you have a job for a certain period of time.
Yes.
In that world, you're always looking for work, which I think can keep you nimble. The careers I admire a lot are the people who've really maintained a real working actor life. Like I'm close friends still with an actor named Ken Tiger, and we did Just One of the Guys together. He played the teacher where the rest of us were students.
Yep.
And
fairly recently, he was in The Avengers, I believe, not that long ago.
Yes. But here's my favorite Ken Tiger story. So Ken is absolutely brilliant. He has 3 Harvard degrees, undergraduate, master's, PhD in German studies.
Wow.
So then he goes
Wow.
through his acting years, his 20s, his 30s, his 40s, his 50s, his 60s, his 70s. In his 70s, he's cast as Himmler in Man in the High Castle, and he
Yeah.
gets to do some of it in German. I'm like, so
Oh
man,
man.
that college degree finally paid off.
Paid
Finally,
off,
in your
right?
70s. It's remarkable.
Yeah.
I want to talk a little bit about that really quick. Kenneth Tiger was great in Just One of the Guys. And I want to talk about Just One of the Guys because we absolutely adore that movie. We've had Joyce on our show and she was lovely. And eventually down the road, we want to do a cast reunion, which would be fantastic. But that was one of your earlier roles, right?
So I finished All My Children. I started on a soap and I did it for a year. And then my character was thrown into prison. And then Paramount Pictures flew me out to LA to screen test for a pilot with Christopher Lloyd, which I got and we made, but it wasn't picked up.
Hmm.
That was my first movie, Just One of the Guys. And
Yeah.
I was driving my boyfriend to the audition. He was auditioning for the role that Lee McCluskey played, the kind of college-age boyfriend of Joyce's. And I drove him, and it was, I think, the Warner Brothers lot. And you know, those LA buildings that you have 2 stories, but you have the outside corridor. You're not inside. So I was kind of standing outside on that cement hallway, if you will. And Grant was inside auditioning. And then someone came out and asked me to step in and audition. And I got the movie and Grant didn't.
Wow.
Mm.
I know that not a good moment in our relationship.
We're not talking about Grant Show, are we?
No, Grant Forsberg.
Okay.
He has died. He was a great guy. What are some of the things he did? Well, we did that pilot together. That's how we met.
Okay.
And he did some films, but he died young. Nice, wonderful guy. But that's how I got that movie.
Wow. Wow.
Mhm.
That was probably caused a little bit of a rift. I'm so happy for you. So happy for you. You talk about really quick. I just have to say, I was a kindergarten teacher for 15 years until I became a voice actor. And so I went from that, well, I have my job now, right? To, oh my
Right.
gosh, when am I going to get a job now? So
Right.
that transition's very rough.
Ending. Yeah.
It is, but I will say with Just One of the Guys, that film checks all the boxes when it comes to like 80s nostalgia that we love, right? Fashion, music, montage, dancing, like it's got all of those things. It seemed on paper or on screen anyways, like a very fun shoot, very fun experience. We talked to Ari Gross as well. He was on the show and he shared some fun memories from that shoot. Was it a pleasant experience for you?
It was a very pleasant experience. I really made some lifelong friendships there. I talked to Tony Hudson regularly. I talked to Joyce. I have talked to Ari. I'm very close with Ken. And Ken's husband is a guy called Mitch Giannunzio, who was one of the writers. He was an uncredited writer because, writing credits in the movie business are very complicated. And sometimes somebody comes in and does a rewrite and it kicks somebody out getting a credit. But I see them all the time. So it was really a seminal movie for me, both in my understanding of what making a movie was all about and in relationships in that business.
That's incredible. Yeah, Ari would speak about kind of running around with Robert Fieldsteel and John Apicella, just like behind the scenes, just like all their hijinks in Arizona.
Yeah, and we were also young, so it just felt, going away on a movie set when you're young, you feel you're very infantilized in a way. Someone's cooking, someone's driving you somewhere, everybody's kind of wrangling you and telling you where to go and where to be and when. So I do think it can, if you're not mature, it can lead to a failure to mature, but it's fun.
And then you went from Billy Zabka to Clayton Rohner, and I mean, two hunks in,
And I did
fantastic.
2 movies with Clayton, 2.
You did.
That was weird. They were my first 2 films. So there was a moment I thought, are we going to do every movie together?
Right. April Fool's Day you're talking about, of course, which I think was the kind of one of the first movies to really, have a twist like that. Not to give the twist away, but I feel like I've seen that sort of very influenced other, current day TV shows will sort of do little homages to April Fool's Day.
I think you're right. And I wonder if they even know they're winking at April Fool's Day. I do think it was a game changer. I mean, there are if you think about like a Hitchcock movie like Vertigo has an excellent twist in it.
It's my favorite Hitchcock movie, by the way.
Isn't that a good movie?
Beautiful.
Love that movie. But it's a different kind of twist. It's a twist kind of within more of an accepted framework. Whereas with April Fool's Day, the twist is, to use a modern word, it's more meta.
Mm-hmm.
And I think later things came out of it. And with my writing for the first 3 books, I've always had a twist. And I don't know if I'll always be able to write a twist, but I got a great note on my book, Ruby Falls, from my editor. And this is this one. I'll hold it up. And it's set in
I'll hold it up too. Oh, no, that's Ruby Falls. I'm holding a Reef Road. Sorry. My bad. Sorry.
This cover is very evocative of what goes on in the book. And it comes to the moment of this big twist. And she said, I want you to rewatch the movie The Sixth Sense. When the twist comes in that movie, the director goes back and gives you a quick series of flashbacks where you see scenes you've already seen, but from the knowledge point that you have now, you see them differently.
Yes.
You focus on something different. Her position was, she said, nobody wants Agatha Christie anymore, that kind of locked room mystery where here we all are in a room and one of us ends up dead and one of us did it. And, toward the end of the movie or book, in walks the detective who said it was the French parlor maid. And you're sitting there thinking, well, I didn't even know who she was, the French parlor maid.
Right.
She said, they don't want that. She said, they're not going to figure out the twist before it comes. But when it comes, you want to have really dropped the breadcrumb trail so that they can then say, oh, I see now what all those points were. So I think that was an extremely helpful note.
That's very interesting. And of course, like a good twist is one where you go, wait a minute, and then you want to rewatch it or reread it or revisit this. You want to revisit your steps, retrace your steps. Do you, in your writing process, do you start with the twist and work your way back?
No. Each book has started differently. So Reef Road really began as a deep research dive into the real murder of my mother's best friend, which happened in 1948 Pittsburgh. And it was something that haunted my mother and has haunted me. And I've always paid close attention to stories like Dominic Dunn. His daughter was murdered in Hollywood, and then he became kind of a fixated chronicler of some of our most high-profile murder trials for Vanity Fair. Or Michelle McNamara, she wrote I'll Be Gone in the Dark, which became the HBO miniseries. And there was a girl murdered in her hometown outside of Chicago. And I think it gave her that kind of very pointed awareness that those things can happen. So I think I've always had that in my consciousness. And so Reef Road began with that. And I didn't want to write it as nonfiction. My point is not really getting into every single factual detail of the real murder. Thematically, I wanted to explore this idea of conferred trauma, that, there's an act of violence that occurs to one person, but it has a big ripple effect on other people. Think about Mystic River by Dennis Lehane. If you read the book or saw the movie, that it's about that. So it was easier to get to that through fiction. So that was the genesis there. With Ruby Falls, that was weird. The first 2 chapters downloaded in my little brain one day. And I had never had that happen. And I thought, what the heck is this?
Yeah.
And what was very funny, when I sent the book to Fred Walton, the director of April Fool's Day, he sent me a lovely note saying, you know, how much he liked it. And I was talking to a friend of mine, and I was saying, you know, my dad died when I was 19, and my dad didn't know anything I've done, and he sure doesn't know anything about Ruby Falls. Later that day, same day, I went to a storage unit looking for a famous box of baby clothes that I had ironed and put away when my girls were young, because I have a little teeny granddaughter. And I thought, I have to find those clothes. And you probably can't see it, but out of a box in storage fell this photo of my father and me at Ruby Falls.
Oh,
I thought, oh,
wow.
that in the back of the book. So,
Wow.
but that book obviously must have come from this trip to Ruby Falls, which is a horrible place. Very scary. Have you ever
What-
been there?
No,
any-
no. For
No.
everyone listening, please give your take on why it's so scary.
It is an underground waterfall. So it's very dramatically beautiful, but you wouldn't know it because they turn off the lights.
And where is it located?
Chattanooga, Tennessee.
Okay.
They turn it off to pitch black darkness. And so I remember being very scared there. So Ruby Falls begins with a 6-year-old girl on a trip to Ruby Falls with her dad, and they've turned off the lights.
Nope.
She cannot tell where the waterfall is in relationship
Oh my gosh.
to her
Nope.
body. And a tour guide is saying, you know, and the divers have dived down and they've never been able to find the bottom. And this kid is riveted.
My
And-
God.
Her dad lets go of her hand. And when the lights come back on, he's gone.
No.
So, and this is why writers would use different time periods. This is a moment in 1968. So there are no credit card records, there are no cell phone records, there are no cameras. So the tour guides are looking at this kid thinking, we don't think she came in here alone. Obviously, we don't know who she came in with.
Oh, man.
So they take her upstairs, finally call the police. And by the end of the day, the mom figures out something is wrong. She tracks her daughter down, and the mother and daughter are grounded in Chattanooga, Tennessee for the rest of the summer. The child is in what we would now call PTSD, and the mom's dealing with the search. And I'll give you the quick rest of the synopsis.
Oh.
She grows up to become an actress on a soap opera called The Finger of Fate. And she is written out, as we all know what that means in the movie business. She is fired, and she hightails it for Europe. And she meets a tall, dark, handsome stranger. And this is the gothic part of it, very referential of Rebecca. She meets this guy, she doesn't know him, and his name is Orlando Montague. And she marries him without knowing him, and not a very well thought out life choice. They go to Rome, and they're about to go in the catacombs, and she has an attack of claustrophobia, naturally. But she decides not to tell this brand new husband thing that happened to her as a child. The last teaser I'll give you, they move to Los Angeles. They find the perfect cottage in the Hollywood Hills. She is cast in a remake of Rebecca on the Paramount lot, and Orlando starts to change. He's not as nice as he used to be. So you start to peel the onion of what are his secrets. So that, I mean, that just came out of this weird, crazy download of the first 2 chapters. And then I built this Gothic book. But so I'll tell you, in the research process there was interesting. So she's a girl her name was Ruby. Her name's Eleanor Ruby Russell. As a child, she was called Ruby. She's abandoned in Ruby Falls. So it's definitely a double entendre. She pitches that name and grows up to be Eleanor Russell, but she's obsessed with what could have happened to her father. So becomes a bit of a conspiracy theorist. And I had a film producer say, would you consider moving this to the modern era? I said, a conspiracy theorist today, wow, you could go very dark. You just have someone on the internet all the time.
Yeah.
Back then, so by the 80s, when she's a young actress in Hollywood, she just, goes to the library and looks at books and to see what happened to her dad. But the decision was made going along of what exactly did happen to the dad. As I looked into the possibilities of what could have happened to the dad, it sort of revealed itself.
Mhm.
I also want to say too, having it be a period piece, 1968, when you did not have cell phones, did not have access to contacting people. I had a traumatic accident when I was 5, and I almost died. And my brother could not get a hold of my mom because he didn't know the phone number to call and didn't know about calling 911 or whatever, because it was like 1980, I want to say 3 or 2, so it was not, you just didn't dial 911 and then you go.
Wow.
So you think of these moments and
it's horrible in real life, but either in literature or in cinema, they're very important. They're not really tricks, but they're choices you can make as a writer. Like Reef Road, I set in the pandemic lockdown.
Yeah.
I wrote it here in this house in the pandemic lockdown. And so I was writing it day and date with what was going on. But I also thought it was extremely conducive to a thriller because it imposes these constraints around your characters. It puts them
Totally.
in a box. So there's a younger woman whose husband disappears. She's married to a very handsome fellow from Buenos Aires, and he disappears with the children 3 weeks into the lockdown and is seen with security camera footage getting on a plane for Argentina, and she can't follow. Those things are very helpful in whatever you want to call it, thriller, suspense, mystery. You want those definitions.
I love that though.
Yeah.
Because you're using what's going on in that moment, in that time, to create that suspense and that drama.
Mm-hmm.
You referred to in Reef Road, when I saw you at the book signing, you called Palm Springs I believe you said a shady place or a sunny place for. What did you say?
That's a great quotation. So I've heard that quotation attributed to 2 writers. There's a famous Florida writer called Carl Hyacin. They've made a lot of movies of his books. His books are always 2 titles, and he examines that seedy underbelly of Florida. I've heard that he said it, but then I've also heard that Somerset Maugham said it about the south of France back in the 1920s. A sunny place for shady people.
There you go.
Yeah, it's a great pithy little line, which I think that explains a lot of what we like in movies and books. I think it's why we like soap operas. We want to see people who look good and who live in nice places, but have something going on underneath, just like we have, maybe worse than we have. I think people can relate to that. So I think being here in Palm Beach, which is a very rich and beautiful place, you think of Worth Avenue in Palm Beach, it evokes the same images as Rodeo Drive in Beverly Hills. They're kind of shorthand. It telegraphs exactly where you are. But then when you have stuff going on under it, darker things, I think people are attracted to that.
Well, I'm gonna attribute that line to, if people say, where'd you get that line? I'll say, well, Deborah Goodrich Royce said that. So you'll be the third, incarnation of that line now.
Okay.
And we'll be like, Zak, why are you just talking about Florida randomly?
Because I want to go there.
Or you attribute it to all the places.
Right. Oh. Well, you can say the same about Santa Monica at times too, I suppose. So,
well, any place of wealth.
Yeah.
Really, I think, there are 2 ways we often go. We like to see extremely impoverished people like, Ozarks, or we like to see rich people like Dynasty, or to have a newer example, Knives Out. Knives Out is appealing because it's a fancy house, it's fancy people, and they're just behaving like a bunch of animals. Worse than animals, they're bad.
We can all relate to that, I think, in some degree.
Yeah.
So family dynamics,
Absolutely.
right? So, and then Finding Mrs. Ford, can you give us a brief synopsis of
I
that?
can. So Finding Mrs. Ford, I'll hold that
That's your
up.
second book. Your first was Ruby Falls. Second
No,
is
no, Finding Mrs. Ford was first.
Oh, that's right. Sorry.
So in Finding Mrs. Ford, um, it is very Hitchcockian. It's the story of a woman whose past catches up with her. Mrs. Ford lives in a beautiful seaside community of Watch Hill, Rhode Island. So picture Newport, if you've never heard of Watch Hill. And on a sunny August day in 2014, the FBI shows up to ask her about an Iraqi Chaldean man. The Chaldeans are Catholics from the north of Iraq. And in August of 2014, it's right at the moment when we're reading in the newspaper about ISIS rampaging all over the north of Iraq and killing a lot of people, including many Chaldeans. So they come to ask her about this guy, Sami Fakouri, and she says she does not know him. And they say, well, that's a little funny because he just took a plane from Baghdad to Boston and we picked him up in a car on his way to your house. So you know right away she's lying.
Yeah.
You go back to Detroit in 1979, so 35 years earlier. She's a college student. She meets this wild, crazy, incandescent girl named Annie Nelson, who convinces her to go down to the edge of Detroit, very rough place at the time, and
Still
get
is.
a job in a very sketchy disco. Another poor life choice. She should not make this choice, but she's very much under the sway of this other girl, and she does. And when you get into this disco, you realize it's heavily frequented by Iraqi Chaldean men, which is a population in Detroit. So it's a non-linear story between these two timelines, and you start to go back and forth to figure out what that man is doing looking for her 35 years later.
Yeah.
What happened that summer of 79 and why she's lying. And the fun thing about that book is it comes to a crescendo of the twist. And then you look at it from a little different point of view. And in that one, the inspiration for that was really a girl I had known who was a lot like Annie Nelson, very, I want to use that word again. I'm going to repeat myself, incandescent. And I think we can fall under the influence of people like that. I wanted to look at that kind of female friendship, not from a sexual standpoint, but just really coming in thrall to another person and maybe making choices and decisions that you wouldn't if that person were not influencing you. I also wanted in that book to explore class, going from very working class Detroit to this very rarefied New England seaside community and how a person navigates that and what that involves. And I wanted that slight geopolitical underpinning of what was going on in Iraq and this group of people. So there are a lot of layers in that.
It's really interesting. I mean, are you're from Detroit originally, right? I was born in Detroit as well.
Oh, were you?
Yeah, I lived in Royal Oak for many years.
Yeah, well, I lived in Warren, so they're right next to each other. I like to write real places. For me, it gives me a thrill of recognition when I'm reading someone's novel and they mention that they had dinner last night at the Ivy in Beverly Hills. And I think, I've been there. I know that place. Or, they're walking down a street in Paris. Or I really particularly enjoy that. And I think it lends a very cinematic air because you can be very, very descriptive. I have nothing against people who use made up places for novels or fictionalized places, but I'll tell you why I used Hollywood in Ruby Falls. So I'd lived there. I actually used a street I lived on, Primrose Avenue in the Hollywood Hills. Because Ruby Falls is such a love letter to Rebecca. And the first line in Rebecca is, last night I dreamt I went to Manderley again. What a great sentence. It packs so much into it because you're sitting there as the reader, if you've never read it, thinking, well, what is Manderley? Why can't this person go there? You're
Yeah.
both attracted and repelled. It's got a lot in it. And as a Gothic book, there's always this spooky undercurrent going on. And for me, I think Hollywood feels a little bit like a ghost town. I had lived there, I had moved away, I had gone back when one of my daughters was living there. It felt peopled by ghosts for me. So, and I also think everybody can understand Hollywood because we've had more than 100 years of American cinema. We all know what it looks like. No matter where you live, you've seen Hollywood.
Right.
So I just, you can conjure up, what do those streets look like? What do the lampposts look like? Those ones with the frosted acorn bulbs at the top.
Yeah.
And all of that, I just, I think it was a perfect kind of tie-in to Rebecca, an homage, if you will.
Is that your favorite Hitchcock film?
No, I don't think it is my favorite. Boy, Vertigo is a top one.
Yeah.
Rear Window is a top one. I'm trying to think. I haven't seen North by Northwest in a long time. I am a huge Hitchcock fan. If I could shape a body of work that was comparable to anybody's body of work, as a novelist, it might be his as a director.
Love that. Love that.
That's awesome. And of course, the sort of the ironic thing is like LA is a city of people who like don't read. And I mean, we certainly, we're filled with storytellers for sure, but we're always joking that when it comes to like, there's sort of this emptiness sometimes when it comes to just folks referencing certain things, and we can't, we don't go beyond the contemporary a lot of the time. So it is a joy to talk to you. Well read, well written, and these moments of experiential things when we're talking about real places, like you mentioned, it's like either you've experienced it or you say, I would like to experience that. And that's an experience that I always love having in books where it's like, oh, I haven't been there, but this sounds incredible.
I had that experience reading Shadow of the Wind by, what's his name, Carlos Ruiz Zafón, set in Barcelona. I still haven't gone, but I'm going to Barcelona one day. It's such an evocative book, a thriller, an incredible book. I read it. I was in Singapore. My husband was on a business trip, and I had all these day outings planned that I was going to tour Singapore. I was so enthralled with that book. I saw the inside of the hotel room. It was so good. If you haven't read it, you should read Shadow of the Wind. Okay.
I think, people are going to have their summer reading locked in with all of your books and then that one as well. Yeah. This has been a pleasure. And I'm hoping that we'll come back on.
Fine.
Thanks so much. Take care.
Thank you.